Good afternoon, everybody. My name is William Harold. Welcome to this third webinar from Cambridge Apporaches, the Cambridge Apporaches Working Group. So I'd like to introduce David Revel, who is going to talk to us about some possible routes that the East-West Railway might take through our area. And we're looking at the area between Toft and Great Shelford. In terms of an agenda, there's a couple more housekeeping things that we should talk about. Then David will do a presentation on the routes. If we've got time, I'll add a little bit about how East-West Rail got to choose their option E, so our area for this railway. And then we'll move on to questions and answers. So I guess the only other thing I wanted to say up front was a lot of people have asked us what can they do to influence the routing of this railway. And so if you look on the supporters section of the Cambridge Apporaches website, there's some ideas there which include writing to your MP, which will be Anthony Brown. You can download and display our poster, or just tell your neighbours about it, because a lot of people still don't know about this this railway. If you're interested in participating in our working group, then you can email us on info@cambridgeapporaches.org, and we'll get back to you and talk about it. We do put out new information that we've learned from talking to East-West Rail and others on the website. So if you want to make sure you're up to date with that, you can subscribe on the website for updates. Without further ado, then I think I will hand over to you, David.
Okay, I'll just admit some more people.
Okay, cool. Actually, while we're waiting for that, there's one more thing I should say. So David is a parish councillor in Haslingfield, but fortunately he's also a civil engineer with 15 years experience in railways. So he, whatever routes he's come up with, have some knowledge behind them. But David will explain that anyway.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the presentation, to the webinar. The purpose of the webinar is to give you information about the intentions of what East-West Rail is and what their intentions are in this area. I'll give you a bit of brief whoops, excuse me, hang on. I'll give you a brief background to East-West Rail, talk about the purpose of Cambridge Apporaches, and then go on into the main meat of the webinar, which are the possible route alternatives. What William said about what you can do, and then take questions and answers. So East-West Rail was set up 3 years ago by the government to design, construct and operate a railway between Oxford and Cambridge. The railway will in the future carry on to the eastern ports, Felixstowe in particular, and that is done by a separate organisation called East-West Rail Consortium. It's publicly funded. It's a nationally significant infrastructure project, which means in practice that they don't have to follow the local planning restrictions. Quite an important point in this area. They've already held a public consultation at the beginning of last year, and as a result of that, they gave us 5 options, and they chose option E. And these are broad corridors through which the alignment will pass. So it's not defining the actual route at the moment. It's defining the broad corridor. And that is that they've said that they are going to choose option E, and I'll show you what that is in a minute. The basic reasons that they gave were that it was the best value for the taxpayer. It was the most popular with those responding to the consultation, and provided the best opportunities for the environment, whatever that means. So East West Rail company operates between Oxford and Cambridge, split into two sections, the central section and the western section. As I said, the eastern section will come later to connect to the eastern ports, East Coast ports. The western section, in part, phase 1 is already built between Oxford and Bicester. The section between Bicester and Bedford, some enabling works have already been carried out, and they were due to start construction on this section last year. But the area under consideration is the central section between Bedford and Cambridge via St Neots and Camborne. So in practical terms, Bedford is here, St Neots, they're not sure exactly where it's going to go, but in that range of positions. Camborne, they've at the moment selected a station to the south of Camborne. And the area that we're considering, by we I mean Cambridge Approaches, is the area to the east of Toft here, as far east as Great Shelford and as far south as Newton. So you can see it's a very broad corridor going from Barton, near Barton, to Haslingfield and Trumpington to south of Harston. So in terms of the programme, East West Rail are due to decide on the route, the alignment options that they're going to present to us in January of next year. So they're going to decide on those options. I don't know how many there'll be, perhaps half a dozen, this month. Ministers will then confirm those options, due to be next month, with another public consultation on the alignments of each of the options in COVID permitting January next year. So just three or 4 months time. After the public consultation, East West Rail decide on the preferred option sometime in 2021. They took about 9-10 months last time to decide on the general route and chose option E. I don't know how long, it might be quicker this time. I just don't know. They're due to, after they've decided on the preferred option, they're going to carry on to detailed design and expect to complete the detailed design and submit it to the public in 2022. Then there's a laborious process obtaining secure development consent over 2 years between 22 and 24 to enable construction to begin in 25. Okay, the purpose of Cambridge Approaches is to raise, basically to raise awareness of East West Rail project in this area. And we're doing that by developing some alignment options that hopefully will mimic those that East West Rail will produce, but not necessarily. There's quite a good chance that they'll produce others and modify the ones that I've already produced. But This will enable people to think about things, what they want and what they don't want. And we are holding consultations, weekly consultations with the parish councils. We have for the past few weeks now, and votes have been cast on which options they prefer. They are partly provisional, so I can't share them with you now. But once we get a pecking order for the alignment options, we'll then lobby East West Rail to adopt our views. In addition to considering just the option E area, this area, with a station at Camborne South, we're also looking at the possibility of a station in Camborne North, with a route that goes along the A428 and then goes via Barton through to South Cambridge, Cambridge South. We're also, Cambridge Apporaches is also considering an option that links up with Cambridge North Station. So totally out of this area. So what are the constraints in the option E area? The main one clearly are the villages, Great Eversden, Little Eversden, Comberton, Barton, Toft, which is in a narrow part of the bound of the envelope, Haslingfield, Harston, Hawkston, etc. Great Shelford, particularly impacted. In addition to that, we've got the extension to the Trumpington Park and Ride, the planned extension to it, shown here, and the Trumpington Wildlife Park, outlined in blue here. We've also got an industrial effluent disposal plant just outside Hawkston, sewage treatment plant here, beautiful countryside, some protected areas that are shown in pale yellow. And on the southern boundary, we obviously have the chalk ridge. East West Rail intend to link up to the West Anglia Main Line round about this junction here. So that's the junction between the King's Cross line here and the Liverpool Street line, just to the north of Great Shelford. They haven't said exactly where they'll link up, but it's that sort of general area. In terms of ecology, it's very clear that the railway, whichever route it takes, will destroy and fragment locally important habitats. Clearly, the mammals will be affected more than the birds. Hedgerows, watercourses, etc. will be demolished as part of the railway. In particular, the Barbastell bats from Wimpole and Eversden Wood may be affected. But there's a lot of other mammals that would be affected in terms of their foraging routes. And the route, the track route needs to minimise the damage and mitigate where possible. So in terms of if it's an embankment, a railway on an embankment, then there'll be small tunnels underneath to allow the foraging, new foraging routes for the animals. Okay, in terms of the alignment options that I'm going to show you, I should say that they're approximate lines. They're indicative of the routes that East West Rail may show us in January. And we are not privy, I don't believe many people are outside East West Rail and government of the options that they're thinking about. We've tried to obtain information about them, but we've been unsuccessful. I've carried out some assessments, some brief assessments on the routes in terms of proximity to properties, residential properties. So, first route is option, it is an alternative, I've called it alternative 1. And it goes from near Toft here, south of Comberton, well to the south, approximately a kilometre, just over a kilometre from the centre of Comberton, and to the outside mountain. It shows some impact on a small hamlet here on the A603. Try to avoid houses on the Haslingfield Barton Road, just here, the bend. It then goes past the old Varsity line, crosses the Varsity line, avoids Cantaloupe Farm here, avoids the effluent treatment plant, sorry, the sewage disposal plant and the effluent treatment plant here, south of the wildlife reserve, south of the extension to the park and ride, avoids Hawkston Mill. Hawkston is just here, the mill is about here. It avoids that and avoids the walks along, well, the area along the river, and it goes direct across to the Great Shelford, crosses the 13001 here. It's to join with this line, it's not possible to avoid some impact on properties in Great Shelford area. So that's option 1. Option 1A is exactly the same, except for the fact that it starts in a similar location, but it follows the old Varsity line. One constraint that one of the most important constraints that I forgot to mention before was the radio telescopes in this area. They're extremely sensitive, as you can imagine, and a railway going past them causes problems in terms of vibration and electromagnetic interference, as well as line of sight issues. However, it is possible that the radio telescopes, which are about here, some of the radio telescopes, the active ones, here could be moved to another part of the site if MRAO decide to do that. It reduces the impact in this area on Lark Rice Farm and Bird Farm, but in other respects it follows the alignment to Great Shelford. Alternative 2 is to the south of the radio telescopes. So again, it starts in a similar position, just to the east of Toft, goes to the junction of the the Comberton Road and the 603, crosses round about that point, cross Washpit Lane, doesn't go close to Harleton. It's about a kilometre, just over a kilometre away, but fairly close to the radio telescopes. It then crosses the Barton Road from Haslingfield, close to the northernmost properties, crosses Cantaloupe Road, and then meets up with the alignments 1 and 1A here. and to Great Shelford. Alternative 3 again follows the same route as alternative 2 as far as the A603, just here, but then proceeds to the south of Haslingfield, close to Harleton, to the south of Haslingfield, and probably because of Chapel Hill, Money Hill, it'll be fairly low down. It'll be in a cutting. This option is in a cutting, a deep cutting, under the road from Barrington, Chapel Hill, and then swings round again to join the other alignments near to the north of Hawkston. I've then chosen option 3A, which is almost identical to 3 on plan, except that to the south of Haslingfield, it would be in a cut and cover tunnel. And if I go back to the previous slide, but a cutting clearly is a cutting in a permanent scar on the hillside. It will remain. It impacts on the foraging route for animals. It's ugly. There'll be noise issues. It cuts footpaths. Long bridges would be required to pass over it. There's be a permanent loss of farmland, and a lot of the fill. You can see this slope of the sides, that they're obviously approximate, but they won't be vertical, that's for sure, in the permanent case. A lot of fill to be removed. So a lot of construction disruption in the area. As opposed to that, a cut and cover tunnel, because it's only open for a limited period of time, you can have much steeper sides to the tunnel, to the cutting. So a cutting will be cut, the spoil would be partly taken away and partly stockpiled. A concrete box would be constructed in the bottom of the tunnel, and then the fill that had been stockpiled put back on top. So the advantages of this are that it's quiet. There's little impact, permanent impact on the ecology. There's less visual impact except at the entrances. There'll be no permanent loss of footpaths. You wouldn't require a bridge across. You just construct a road on top of the fill. The farmland would remain intact except during the temporary stage, and there'll be less construction disruption to the area because less farmland would be useless. Needs to be removed. So that was 3A. Option 4 follows the lines of 3 to the south of Haslingfield, and then proceeds to the south of Harston and joins the line of the King's Cross line. So it's not the actual track. There'll be a parallel track to the King's Cross line, but that would involve some disruption. A new bridge would have to be constructed over the road. There's a level crossing here between Newton and Harston. New bridge would have to be constructed. Modifications to the bridges over these roads here, the M11, that road, these roads, and there'll be, to make way, there's a cutting here, so that would have to be widened, and some houses in Great Shelford. There's still demolition required to significant number of houses in Great Shelford, unfortunately. Option 5, I've put this in only because the boundary line of the option E area goes near Newton. So East West Rail must have considered a route in this area originally. It's got lots of disadvantages, so I don't think it's really feasible, but I've shown it for completeness sake. So it would follow the line to the south of Harston, carry on just to the north of Newton, undulating countryside, as you know, around here, cross the M11 and join the Liverpool Street line here. So there'd be no dualling that I've assumed. I think it's unlikely that that is feasible for operational reasons. There'd just be too many trains in this area on that line. So any level crossings here will be down most of the time. I told you at the beginning that we've also looked at a route that is outside the option E area and starts from a station to the north of Cambourne. It follows the same transport corridor as the A428. As you know, it's dual carriageway. Just to the east of Hardwick. It then swings down, crosses Long Road between Comberton and this area near Madingley. Under there, then crosses the A603 just to the south of the rifle range. And then follows the line for about a kilometre, just under a kilometre of the M11 before swinging away down to the west of Cantilever Farm and then joins the other alignments across the M11 and the 1301 to join the West Anglia main line here. This one has considerable advantages in that it has far less impact on existing properties. And I can show you information about that later. So that's the main point about it. In this area, there are more footpaths crossed than the other options. And this area is slightly undulating, so that there would be some there would be some cuttings required here. But the main advantage in this one is that we think it has less impact on scheduled monuments and mainly on residential property. Okay, so those are the alignments, and I'll now pass over to William to talk about the business case.
Okay, thanks, David.
Do you have control, or do you want me to just?
Yeah, if I could just ask you to kind of go page down when I'm done, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. So I just want to zoom out a bit from option E and replay why option E was chosen by East West Rail. And then David's actually sort of said these points, but what I wanted to focus on was why it's best value for the taxpayer, how that business case has been arrived at by East West Rail. So David, if you can move on to the next one. So these were the 5 options that were consulted on in the first quarter of 2019. So A, B, C, D, and E, and they've decided on E, which David has described in much more detail. 3 of the options went through Bassingbourn, and 2 of the options went through Cambourne. And there was a lot of debate about whether Camborne or Bassingbourne was the best intermediate station or the last station before you get to Cambridge. And there are a lot of good arguments, I think, for Camborne as being a growing town compared to Bassingbourne. Yeah, so other than that, I think they're pretty much as described. There was a previous stage where I think it was even before East West Rail was formed that they were looking at how to come into Cambridge, and they looked at going straight in from the west, coming in from the north, or coming in from the south. And so before this consultation, they'd already decided that they wanted to come in to Cambridge South. So that wasn't something that the public were consulted on. David, can we move on to the next one? So there was a campaign group that some of you may have heard of called Cambed Railroad, and they came up with a solution that came in from the north. I think they did 31 consultations and webinars and stuff with local people. And their route was broadly the same as option B, but rather than coming through our area in the option E area, it went through Camborne to the north. There was another station at North Stowe, and then it came into Cambridge North. And actually, because that had been so widely talked about during the consultation, East West Rail did do some analysis of that route in their option report, which is the thing they used to explain their decision to go for option E. So if we go on to the next one. I wasn't expecting that slide. Yes, no, yeah, I was actually. Go back one, sorry. Yeah, that's fine. So what this is the 5 options, A to E, and if you look at the blue columns, those were the costs, the total costs to implement and run for 60 years in billions of pounds in 2010 prices, and with certain assumptions about you know, how many users there would be. So what you can see is that option A was the cheapest, and option E, which is the one they ended up selecting, was the most expensive. And so during the consultation, there was a lot of focus, I think, on option A, which is a Bassingbourne option, because it seemed like at the time that was the most cost-effective way of doing things. At the time of the decision document, the cost estimates had changed. So if you look at the orange columns, those were the revised total costs that were published in January 2020. So you can see they've all gone up a lot, but option E has not gone up as much as the other ones. So that whereas option E was the most expensive, by the time they had revised their costs, that was no longer the case. And what they're looking for here is the highest benefits for the lowest cost. So this change meant option E was a little bit more attractive in their estimations. They didn't give any explanations that I saw for why the costs had gone up so much, but those are the figures. Next. So this is we're now showing the benefits. So the blue columns are the same total January 2020 total cost as we saw before. And the orange column here is the estimated benefit that East West Rail Company published. And so you can see there's different benefits for the different options. And I've also put in the Cambridge North option because they did actually give figures for that as well. So what you can see is that the orange columns, which are the benefits, are lower than the blue columns. So that means that the benefits are less than the costs, which means that, you know, normally that would mean that the project wouldn't be worth doing because it costs more than the benefits. So talking to East West Rail and others about this, it emerges that the benefits only include direct transport benefits, so people using the railway, and something they call productivity benefits, which I guess is something to do with the knock-on for businesses that are able to use the railway that weren't before. It's recognised that there are wider benefits of the railway, and in particular, they talk about how around the stations you tend to get farmland is converted into residential properties, and also, you know, offices tend to spring up around stations, and so that is explicitly not included in the analysis, but it's probably one of the most important factors. So what I've done here is the Treasury rules for kind of sign off of these projects is normally that you have the benefits are twice the costs. So a benefit cost ratio of 2. So what I've done with the grey columns here is how much additional benefit would you need to get to a benefit cost ratio of 2? So what you can see is the grey columns are quite large numbers. And you know, if I was going to criticise the decision for option E, what I would say is, yes, you know, with your figures, it has the best benefit to cost ratio, but because they haven't actually assessed probably the biggest factor, which is this improvement in land use, then is it a reliable decision? And what this actually means in practice is they haven't talked enough to the South Cambs people who are in control of the local plan about where is the best place to put this railway. So there's a development corridor that we see going from, for example, Camborne through to North Cambridge in the local plan. Lots of new housing development along there, not so much in the option E area. That's not taken into account in their decision, say, between a Cambridge North option or any of these Cambridge South options. Another point to make about the choice of option E is that, so options D and E have a station at Bedford Midland Road, so at the Bedford end, whereas all the other options have a station at Bedford South. And that means that it's recognised that the benefits are higher for a station at Bedford Midland than they are at Bedford South. And so you can actually see the orange columns for options D and E are amongst the highest. So they are benefiting from that Bedford Midland Road station. Of course, actually what happens at Bedford and what happens at Cambridge are completely unrelated, but it's just those are the route options that they have consulted on or chosen. So I guess one final point to make on this is that South Cambs District Council did put in a consultation response in 2019, and they pointed out that the analysis didn't include enough reference to the local plan and where they were planning to develop houses and science parks and so on over the next decade, and that their support for option E or a Cambridge South was conditional on working more closely with East West Rail during 2019 to kind of work up an alignment between the railway infrastructure and where the council want to develop properties. So to our knowledge, that hasn't happened. And the danger here is that if we go ahead with option E, because there's a kind of flow from infrastructure to jobs and then to housing, and one can imagine that over the next decades, what will happen if we have good infrastructure, railway infrastructure going through the option E area, is that the villages will become more developed because, although initially there's only a station at Cambridge South and at Camborne, then over the decades to come, and the lifetime of the railway could be 100, 150 years, there will be more stations that will appear. And so contrary to the local plan, which is currently talking about preserving villages to the south of Cambridge, because the infrastructure is there, that will tend to bias things towards more development. That's I think a likely consequence of option E. So David, I'm not sure if I got any more slides, but those are just the notes on what I've said. So I think we've been talking quite a bit. Do you want to just wrap up on these points, David?
Yeah. So as William said right at the very beginning, if you're opposed to some of the options that we've put forward today, or have preferences for some of them, then please write to your MP. There will be a template letter, which is just a template. You can adopt it or otherwise on our website. Please spread the word to your friends and neighbours. We've got a poster on our website that you can print and put up in your car or your windows. If you've got any legal or environmental expertise, we're very grateful for, we would be very grateful for help and help in finding other weaknesses in East West Rail's proposals.